Hello and welcome. My name is Joe Robertson, and I'm your host for Brass Tacks, Talking Cybersecurity, brought to you by Fortinet. The expression getting down to brass tacks means getting to the core of a subject, talking about the important points. And the subject of our brass tacks is cybersecurity, and more specifically, its business implications. So this podcast is aimed at business executives and board members whose roles could be impacted by cyber attacks, which, when you really get down to it, means just about everybody. As for me, I'm an executive consultant helping top managers navigate the intersection between business needs and security requirements. For Brass Tacks, I will be talking with cybersecurity experts from many different companies about the business implications of cybersecurity. For each episode, we will focus on one theme with one expert. Today's theme is demystifying cybersecurity terminology. To discuss this, I have invited Patrick Grillo, Senior Director of Solutions Marketing at Fortinet. Patrick, welcome to Brass Tacks. Let's talk cybersecurity.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Really appreciate it.
Well, what I thought we'd do first off is, since we're trying to talk about the terminology, what we're really dealing with is translating geek speak into real human talk. And that's something that I know that you do all the time. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you do it.
All right. Well, let me give you an example, a real life example, because when we're done here today, I'm flying off to Sweden to present in front of a non-native English speaking crowd. Now, as a public speaker, I have to make sure that my message doesn't get lost. And one of the things I do to ensure that is I make sure I don't use jargon or slang or things like that. So for example, if I was talking to you, you're a non-native English speaker, and I start using terms like tonic, bubbler, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Or some military terms, if I was describing a situation as foobar or snafu, again, you're lost. Or even some slang that's out of context or out of date, that if I was talking about, I wanted to meet the top dog, but I could only see the second banana. I mean, all of that, my message may be there, but it's lost because of the choice of language.
Almost like brass tacks, which is something that not everyone understands, but I think that after this podcast, I'm hoping that they will, because it's very important to get past the jargon and to what the core of the message is. So, getting past the technobabble, okay, when we hear about cyber attacks, specifically in the news, we hear about businesses whose computers are locked up with ransomware. We hear about data theft, data loss, and all that kind of stuff. Your mission, should you decide to accept it, is, can you tell us what those things all mean without going into the technobabble details?
As soon as I get the Mission Impossible theme out of my head, I'll be able to do that. Sure. I mean, we go back in time, it really, because history tells us a lot about where we are in the current time. And in the beginning, I mean, there's a category of attacks that are about denying you a service. So, for example, you want to go to your online banking, you want to check your balance, but the bank is subject to what's called a denial of service attack. Basically, all it is brute force to force the servers that you want to get to, that they can't service their crowds.
So when I'm on my online banking and it seems like it's taking a long time to respond, that could just be slow servers. But if it never responds, that could be one of these blocking attacks.
Exactly. So it's a denial of service. Now, the other one, and we tend to see it more often, is where the hacker wants to get a piece of software, what we call malware, into the network. Now, the type of malware, what its function is, that will vary in attacks. The one that we hear most often right now is about ransomware. And there's a lot of hoop and hysteria about what ransomware is and all of this. That's fine, but we don't want to lose sight of it's the malware getting into the network that triggers everything. The ransom part of it, where I steal your data and I notify you, I want you to pay me $10 million in Bitcoins, that's the end of the process. The very beginning is getting that malware in there. And again, ransomware is just one of these types of attacks, but it's the one that's getting the most attention right now because of the consequences.
So the network is a key part of all of this. Nothing happens without the network, and everything passes across the network.
Well, that's it exactly. And remember, the hacker is not a magician. He just can't miraculously get the malware into the network. They have to leverage the weak link in the chain, which unfortunately is us, people. So if you think about it, you have to be honest with yourself. When you get an email, that you've won $1 million or you've won a all expense paid trip around the world, you really think that's feasible? Or that
the Nigerian
prince really needs your help to get $10 million out? Interesting piece of trivia that the African prince is actually based on a scam called the Spanish prisoner, which dates from the 17th century.
Wow. So people have been doing non-cyber attacks for a long time.
Hey, if something works, why change?
Good point. Now, that actually brings up one of the questions that I wanted you to address, which is, what are the main goals of attackers? I mean, it sounds like, obviously, potentially money. That's what ransomware seems to be largely, but it is also other things like disruption. And when we talk about data theft, what are they stealing?
Well, the objective of an attack is all of those things, all right? Now, a few years ago, and I had my personal experience, and one of my credit cards was caught up in an attack. The main objective was getting credit card information, and they're going ahead and using it. In my case, about 6 months after the attack, somebody tried to charge $9,000 on my American Express card. Fortunately, American Express's anti-fraud software, the first line of defense, worked. However, credit card information, because of all of the attacks, and banks have gotten so good at canceling and issuing new credit cards, the value of a credit card number is now very, very low. What's most important to a hacker is permanent data.
Like, what does that mean?
Your name, your date of birth, your social security number, information that is about you that's not going to change. That has the greatest value to the hacker. And so, yes, there is a monetary piece, particularly with ransomware, because they've got your data, and in an organization, there's proprietary data mixed into there. So there is a value associated with that as well. For consumers, for individuals, it's more about your permanent data rather than something transitory like a credit card number.
And that's why we've got laws and regulations like the GDPR in the U.S. and the California data privacy law regulations, that sort of thing, to protect that.
Exactly. And that's why, because in response to all of these attacks, the regulatory process has become a bit more stringent, let's call it. You mentioned GDPR covering the European Union. We have another one called DORA, and I'm not talking about the cartoon character. There's another one called NIS, Network Information Security. So yes, there's a lot is being done, but the hacker is still there leveraging the weak link in the chain, as I said, is us.
And one of the things that when I talk to executives, I often bring up is that you can think of your staff as the weak link of the chain, but you can also look at them as your first line of defense. And that's why cybersecurity training is so important, that your staff recognizes things that are not quite as obvious as the Nigerian prince email, and recognize when there are scams and what are called social engineering attacks that are trying to get their information to get into the corporate network.
That's it exactly, because if you think of it, in any company, there's technology. And now more and more companies are equipping all of their employees with technology, whether it be a handheld device or a computer. But the percentage of the people with technology who actually understand the consequences of that technology is normally very, very small. So yes, organizations should undertake the effort to transform their employees from the weak link in a chain to the first line of defense.
Now, we've been talking, I said the theme of this Brass Tacks was going to be demystifying the terminology for cybersecurity and translating geek speak into real human talk. And you've been doing a good job of not getting too complicated here. But what I'd like to do is see how good you are at translating. So I'm going to give you a few words. I'm going to throw out some terms that people that are in our audience, executives, managers, are likely to hear from their staffs and may or may not understand in the context of cybersecurity. Things like convergence, consolidation, firewall, antivirus, VPN, MFA, ZTN, ZTNA, IPS, EDR, SecOps, SASE. You got enough? Okay.
I'll take what's behind door number 3, Monty.
Okay, you got it. So let's start. Convergence.
A concept of bringing multiple functions together in a single device. Its objective is to reduce complexity, make life simpler.
Okay. Consolidation sounds pretty similar.
It is. It's very similar to convergence. Here you're talking about the number of relationships you have in managing your different suppliers. By reducing that, you're reducing complexity, but not reducing your security posture.
Okay. Now, one of the key terms that I'm sure that most of our audience has at least heard is firewall. What is a firewall?
Firewall is basically a traffic cop. First of all, it's a foundational building block of security, but it's a traffic cop. You can come through, but he can't. That's the role of a firewall.
Okay, what's the role of an antivirus? How's that differ?
Well, the antivirus is the enemy of the firewall because an antivirus is a function that runs typically on a firewall to keep a specific type of malware out of the network.
Okay. What's a VPN?
Virtual private network. It's about a 20-year-old technology, still very much in use, and the preferred method of securely connecting to a network when you're not in the office. So think working from home or working from a third location.
Okay, so there's an updated version of that called ZTNA, or for our British friends, ZTNA. That's similar, isn't it?
It's similar, and it is a successor to VPNs, and it's based on the concept of zero trust. Now, what zero trust says is we no longer make assumptions about how reliable you are just because of where you connected into the network. ZTNA is a implementation of the concept of zero trust, controlling how you can access an application, and you have rights to that application. But if you want to go somewhere else, I'm going to put you through the same process to make sure you are who you say you are. I'll use different technologies to do that. And rather than just connecting you and forgetting about you, I'm going to go back and periodically reconfirm you are who you say you are and that you have authorization to be in that particular application.
Okay, so in the old days, if I sat down at my desk and my computer was at my desk, the assumption was that's the right guy. He's got access to whatever is on our network. And now with ZTNA, what you're saying is they don't assume that because you're at the computer that you are you. You may be someone who's sitting there and shouldn't be there.
That's it exactly. There's no longer a foundational position that, you're sitting at your desk, therefore you are trusted. Welcome, come on in.
Okay. Now, another term that we talked about was MFA. What's MFA?
Museum of Fine Arts?
Well, that sounds pretty good.
Okay, no, that's multi-factor authentication, and I'm sure everybody is familiar with this. This is the code now if you're going to your online banking more and more often. They send you a code to either an email or your telephone that you have to put in. So it's a combination of who you are and what you know.
Okay. Endpoint protection. That was one of the things in my list.
Well, when you're on your computer, you're an endpoint. And that endpoint is one of the most vulnerable parts of the network. So endpoint protection is a specific piece of software that will have varying functionality in it to make sure, and if an attack gets to you, it's able to defend itself.
Okay. Well, related to that is EDR. What's EDR?
EDR is the next generation, so to speak, of endpoint protection, extended detection and response. Cybersecurity is made up in layers. The first layer is defending yourself. The second layer, because if they get through that first one, is to detect when somebody's made it through. EDR is that concept, detection and response, specifically for the endpoint.
Okay. What about IPS?
Intrusion Prevention System. This is a firewall-based technology designed for specific types of malware where somebody's trying to infiltrate into the network.
Okay. SecOps.
Security operations. This is the umbrella, so to speak, of your staff that is there looking at what's going on in the network, what incidents are going on, and in the current generation of security operations, really transforming itself from a reactive position to a proactive position.
And this is an area where a lot of companies are trying to make investments, because that's where you start getting all of the monitoring function, right? And even the AI aspect of security prevention.
I was hoping we'd make it through without talking about AI. But yes, I mean...
We can't. AI is obligatory in 2024.
Security operations is typically focused on what has already happened and the analysis and what does it mean. They're trying to shift that to being more proactive. And yes, AI does have a role to play in cybersecurity, but it's not the be-all to end-all.
Okay. And I think that actually sums up AI for just about everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. A final one, how about SASE?
This is the buzzwords that's driving us all crazy right now. Secure Access Service Edge. This is a new concept of whether you're working remotely or you're working in the office, a secure way of connecting to the applications. And we can go into details of architecturally how it differs from other methodologies, but basically it's being positioned as a better way to securely access the resources on the network, particularly if you're working away from the office.
Now for the $64,000 question, and you and I are old enough to know what that refers to,
Yes.
but if you don't know, don't worry about it. Here's the big question that execs ask me a lot, and that is, why do their security teams keep coming back to them wanting more budget for more products, for more things to install in their environments?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, security is one of those things that you only hear about when it doesn't work, when there's been a breach. That's one part of it. The other part of it, as society has become more and more connected and we generate more and more enormous volumes of data, that data, as I was talking about before, has value. And the threat landscape, the threat actors, and you typically think of the disgruntled teenager in the attic and doing that. That still exists, but we're talking about well-organized organizations.
Really, crime syndicates as well as states, governments.
Oh, absolutely. You've got the nation state aspect to it. You have the private enterprise of the threat actors. And you don't even need to be smart to do this because you can buy it as a service. So all of these things are factoring in, and we have technological trends that are there to benefit organizations. But every time a technology is brought into an organization, it comes with a liability. It expands the surface, what we call the attack surface, of how you can be attacked by the hackers. And as soon as there's a technological trend happening, the hackers are looking for ways to take advantage of it. So you could call it a cat and mouse game. We try to advance, they catch up, they advance, we catch up, and so on. This is the nature of the game, unfortunately. And even though it's maybe the last 10 years where it's become common knowledge or in our everyday language talking about this, it's been going on for 20 years or so.
Yeah. Okay, so really what you're saying is that there's lots of ways of attacking and new ways are coming up all the time and lots of ways of defending, but nothing prevents every attack.
That's it exactly. And that's another aspect of the market itself because of that dynamic. The cybersecurity market has a lot of economic opportunity. And economic opportunity in any sector attracts newcomers. So this idea of startups coming in, hey, we have a better mousetrap, we have a better way of doing this, coming into the market. So you're seeing these new and improved products. And if you do this, for the most part, the claims, if you only do this, then you'll be protected completely. That's what we call silver bullets. And experience has taught us that silver bullets are only effective on vampires. They don't work in cybersecurity.
It's too bad that they don't, but you're absolutely right. So let me ask a final point, okay? And that is cybersecurity such a black art that only the cognoscenti are able to understand it?
They'd want you to believe that sometimes, But seriously, everything has its own language. Any discipline. I can, look back on our experience, your own experience. Yes, there's always a language to learn when you're talking about a new discipline. Cybersecurity is no different. And when you have cybersecurity professionals talking to each other, it's easy to use the language. There's also a little bit of a snob factor involved. I know what I'm talking about. You don't necessarily. But that's not necessary, as we've been talking about now for the past 10, 15, whatever number of minutes it's been. There are ways to talk about this in plain, simple language. Getting people to do it, however, is sometimes the challenge, because in my role, yes, I can see both sides of the fence. But people in your staff who are responsible for this, they're more comfortable thinking one way. Executives are more comfortable thinking it another way. And transforming cybersecurity risk into business risk is a challenge into itself as well.
Yeah, we could have a complete new episode on that aspect of it. And we're not going to go into that. But you're absolutely right. Cybersecurity really is business security. And all of us have an obligation to secure our businesses, whether it's because of your role in the company, you have a fiduciary duty, whatever. Well, Patrick Grillo, thank you very much for joining us on Brass Tacks, Talking Cybersecurity. You certainly did talk cybersecurity. Thank you very much.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's Brass Tacks, Talking Cybersecurity, brought to you by Fortinet. I hope you found it useful and maybe even interesting. I hope you'll join us again for our next episode of Brass Tacks, Talking Cybersecurity. This series is available both as an audio and a video podcast. You will find it on your regular podcast app or YouTube, as well as on Fortinet TV.